So with that, I'm going to introduce Eric Langer, who is the president and founder of BioPlan Associates. He is responsible for putting this panel together. We're excited to have him back. This is part two of a session that we did last year at Interphex, and I know it's awkward, but on your chairs, the supplement that you have there, that supplement was based largely upon Eric's roundtable that he put together last year. So if you have a chance, grab one of those. If you don't have one, there's some on the back table. And also the Bioprocess Theater is going to be recorded. As a publication and an educator of this market, we are going to transcribe. We're going to publish every single presentation that you see here today and throughout the 2 days. So whatever you miss here today, you will see online and you will see in print as of August. So without further ado, Eric Langer.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate that. And mostly I appreciate the opportunity to do this 2 years in a row. This is about, if you hear another story about leachables and extractables or another cost analysis of cleaning validation, I think you're going to fall down off your chair. So when we talked about this a year ago, we said, well, what do the CMOs really know about single use and the integration of single use, and how can they distribute that, and how can they share that with end users? And so I thought to put together a real sharp panel of experts. So this is really not about data. This is about experience. And this panel right here has an exceptional amount of experience and knowledge and expertise in single use. So this is, frankly, we were just up here as we were doing this kickoff here. I'm thinking what you really want to know is the questions we've got for you, and we want to hear your questions. You don't want to hear us speak. We want to get into the meat of this stuff. So what I'm going to try to do is go as quickly as I can through a couple of slides. These guys are going to talk to you about what happened over the last 12 months. Not what the history of single use is, but what happened over the last 12 months that really is starting to make a serious difference in the way single use devices are being implemented. So I want to start by, let's see if I can get this slide. So I'm going to start by reading the experts' experience here. Danny Valium is Senior Director of Global Technology Innovation at Sanofi Pasteur. He pursues innovation and manufacturing technologies, scouting and assessment and implementation. He's called upon for product and process improvement and troubleshooting across all Sanofi. He lectures at Oxford University in clinical vaccinology programs. He was a founder and head of process development at Cambus. He's a well-recognized expert and author and speaker on many topics, including innovation and integration of innovation into real bioprocessing. John Ward is our VP of Engineering at Patheon. He has 30 years of experience in design, construction, and operation of biological production systems utilizing both single-use and stainless steel systems. Over 300,000 liters of mammalian cell culture systems implemented in multiple countries and locations. 300,000 liters. He's a pioneer in the use of modular construction and large-scale mammalian systems. Bill Hartzell is Director of Strategic Execution at Catalent Pharma Solutions, a global industry leader, as you know. He's responsible for strategy and implementation of aseptic processing for solutions for biologic. Another recognized expert in aseptic processing. He's been actively involved in single-use disposables for 10 years or more. He's on the board of directors for BPSA, author for PDA on single-use manufacturing. He has been chair of the ASME BPI task force for single use. So that's got a lot of experience. Sue Behrens will be batting cleanup for our talk today. She's got an exceptional amount of experience from Merck to IPS and many projects and programs in between. She leads the process design group at IPS, a global provider of technical consulting, design and engineering for complex facilities. She has over 25 years experience in manufacturing sciences for biologics and manufacturing at Merck. She's been involved in all aspects of scale-up and production for biopharmaceuticals. She earned her PhD in chemical engineering from Michigan, University of Michigan, and University of California in Berkeley for her PhD, rather. So we do have a distinguished panel. This is the brain trust of bioproduction and single use. So I'm going to just open our conversation with them with a couple of real quick talking points as we go through. Why CMOs? CMOs are paid to be more efficient and knowledgeable about cutting-edge technology. That's their competitive advantage. CMOs can test and demonstrate technology on multiple platforms in multiple ways. So their breadth of experience has got to be, number one, they're paid to be faster, they're paid to demonstrate data, and they're paid to test these new technologies. So what we want to do is focus on those, what the CMOs are doing in terms of cutting-edge technology. So from our 13th annual report, one of the questions we've asked is, what are the new product development areas of interest to biopharmaceutical manufacturers and CMOs, the people on this stage? What we asked was, this year, was what are the top areas that suppliers, the Pauls, the Mercks, the Millipores, should be focusing their development efforts on? They're essentially, where's the R&D going to come from? And I want to start by saying, new product areas of interest is not where things are broken. It's not where the opportunity is, where the future will be necessarily. It's where things are potentially broken or not quite fixed. So when we look at what the vendors are being asked to do, it means that this is where the vendors' energies should be focusing on fixing something. And you'll notice the top 4 are all disposable products: sensors, connectors, purification devices, chromatography products. All of this is disposable. This is what the industry is looking for. When we look at the bottom of the heap, we see that the bottom of the heap is stainless steel equipment. 3.7% of the industry is saying they want innovation in stainless steel. But does that mean stainless steel is dead? Not in the least. And that's what this talk is going to be about. Stainless steel is the workhorse of this industry. It will always be here. It's clinical scale. The question is, how is innovation in stainless steel and how is innovation in single use going to integrate? And this panel here is the perfect venue for us to find that out. So stainless steel innovation, just the last quick slide here, this is interesting though, because this really wasn't a conversation a year ago. Stainless steel is driving single-use innovation is driving stainless steel innovation now, both in automation, compactness, and reliability. Ask any one of the suppliers out here of the stainless steel technologies, and you'll find this is the case. Stainless steel suppliers focus on traditional stainless steel, the heart of the matter, the heart of the technology, with additional incremental improvements. And incremental improvements, going back to that previous slide, those incremental improvements are what they want. In this case, the stainless steel technologies are looking at sensing, they're looking at automation, they're looking at integration, they're looking at things as detailed as actuators and diaphragms that are extending lives of their products. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn the presentation over to our first presenter, Danny Vellum. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
And I'll just take your chair.
Yeah, please. Hi, I'm Danny Vellum from Santa Fe Pasteur, and we're the vaccines division of Santa Fe. And as an industry, the vaccine industry is pretty conservative. We've grown up making products for babies, infants. So safety comes first, and our ability to move into new technologies sort of follows that same philosophy. So first, the disclaimer statement, because we are big pharma, and we'll go past that. But and I'd like to start with a slide of the very first vaccinees in Jenner 200 years ago, but then move quickly. So as vaccine technology has evolved, and then we've gotten beyond Jenner and into the childhood vaccines in the early part of the last century, continue to evolve, and this microphone is continuing to droop, but that's okay. The technologies have gotten more and more complex for making the vaccines, and then additionally we have this continuing evolution away from stainless to disposables. So it's a complicated business being in vaccines. There are so many different antigen types and so many different modes of production. Most of my work has been in live viral vaccines, And in particular, relating back to the first slide, my first product development effort that fell completely under my responsibility was for the new cell culture-based smallpox vaccine. And it's a unique system in that we're growing vaccinia on suspension cells, vero cells. The vaccinia virus is too big to filter sterilize, so everything we had to do from the get-go is aseptic, and we had to integrate, because we had to move quickly. After 9/11, we had to integrate everything that we could with single use, because obviously fabrication time and engineering time is much longer with stainless. So we jumped into it quickly. When you're thinking about it, you have to worry about the core is your facility and how it's built, but then looking at bags and connectors and sensors, this is not new to you. The spectrum of available technology within the single-use realm has expanded and continues to, but with this expansion we've had to start to worry about standardization and how all these things are going to fit together. And then, as Eric mentioned, leachables and extractables have become a major focus recently. But we've had to focus very much on a supplier relationship, because just getting a bioreactor bag in the mail or in a cardboard box doesn't get you to production. A lot of time spent working with the suppliers to establish how these things are going to be unfolded and installed. This is completely new to our operators, so training has become a huge piece, and that interface with the manufacturers in how to install and make appropriate the use of their equipment. So a couple of take-home messages. There are multiple benefits of working with single use. We end up not with completely single-use systems in most cases, but hybrid systems where certain pieces of equipment we have to rely on what was older technology for TFF and cell disruption, for example. These are inherently focused around high pressure and steamable systems, and so we have to then integrate the pieces that we can with single use. But you also have to consider not on the downside, but as important considerations, that this is becoming highly manual in terms of installing and appropriating, putting together appropriately your process gear. There are lots of new competitors out there in the marketplace. We worry about biosimilars and everything, and that aspect, because suddenly processing becomes accessible to almost anybody. It's essentially self-engineered. And then our change control system has struggled to move from stainless into the single-use realm because of the new sets of constraints and compliance measures around consistency of the single-use material that we get in. And I'll stop there. The idea here is to start the conversation, so I went through this quickly, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much. We're going to try to run through the slides, because what I'd like you to do is write down your questions for our panel when we finish it up. We'll have time for that. John Ward is going to bat next for us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Ward, the Vice President of Engineering at Patheon. We're talking about single use versus stainless steel. And I'll when we come to the conclusion, I'm going to say the answer is both or either. And it really, okay, so as I was saying before, when you think about single use versus stainless steel, there are situations where single use is going to make ultimate sense. There's going to be situations where stainless steel is going to make ultimate sense. And there are going to be situations where you don't really know where the break point is. And what I'm trying to present here is a brief thought process about how you would go through and actually try to make that decision. It's a decision that in the past I've had to make, and at Patheon we're continually, because we're always looking at incremental capacity, it's a decision and a conversation that we're always having. And you know, one of the key things is where are you and where do you need to be? Because that's going to have a huge impact on your decision and your economics, your timeline, etc. So those things have as much to do with the outcome in some cases as the technology itself. And I'll pay attention here to the first example is a new versus an existing facility or an expansion. If you've got a new facility and you're not going to run at high throughputs, there's the potential there for you to actually save a lot of capital on the front end. And if you're not going to run heavy, you could end up doing very well with a single-use system. However, there are certain cost drivers. If you look at if you go through your bill of materials on your costs, and you look at the expensive components from a single-use perspective, that if you've got existing capacity, you might be able to eliminate some of those single-use components. And if you look at the bill of materials, the main driver here is you have a significant cost component on the buffer side, but if you look at the single-use component on the bioreactor side, you may only have two single-use components there, whereas you may have 20 or 30 or 40 units on the prep and hold side. So if you start looking at areas where you can optimize and trade things off, you can start building a model in terms of your requirements and come up with an answer that fits your needs. There's some other cases where, for example, if you're trying to run a 6-pack versus a 2-pack, and you're trying to run really hard and really fast, you're going to push the operations from a portable consideration to the point where you can't operate it anymore, and you've got to go highly automated. You've got to be able to change it over very fast at all times of the day, and you're going to be, pushing many thousands of liters of buffers around very quickly, and that just can't be done all the time in a manual situation. And then I think another major tipping point is, hey, how much product are you putting through your downstream? And when you start hitting 0.8, 1 meter, and 1.2 meter columns, the buffer volumes that you're pushing through, if you're running at a high rate of speed, could cause you to think twice about using a single-use system. But if you're running at a reasonable pace, you might be able to get by with the single use. So there are a lot of different components, a lot of different things you need to think about when you're making the decision. So what we did is we looked at two different operating paradigms. I would tell you that there isn't a single system exactly like this within Patheon. These are kind of idealized systems. One is a high changeover situation for early stage products. One is focusing more on commercial products. And when you look at it, and when we came to the end of the day, the equipment was very much similar when we came up with our ultimate solution. But the people, the number of changeovers, the skill sets that you need in both of these situations are very, 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 very different, and it will impact your decision making. So what we ended up doing is thinking about this to develop a thought process is we looked at a lot of the single existing analysis, and a lot of them were single use versus stainless. We were interested in, hey, where are we with a hybrid? A lot of them were starting off at a low ramp. We were interested in, if we put a facility out there, low utilization as a contract manufacturer, it just wouldn't work. So we wanted to look at this. What happens when we drop in there and we start off at well above 50% utilization, and situations like that. And the other thing that's maybe a little bit different about a contract manufacturer is we're running multiple trains in parallel, whereas a small biotech company may never even come on the radar screen. But if we're running 3 downstreams in parallel or 4 downstreams in parallel, it really changes the game in terms of buffer prep, media prep, etc. So you've really got to think about where are you and where do you want to go. If you want to do only clinical, you'll end up in one location. If you want to run, a lot of lines, a lot of systems and support those, you could end up with a completely different answer. And what we did briefly as a methodology, we took a fully disposable system, a fully stainless steel system, and basically traded out parts in the bill of materials and came up with both two things: a tipping point and a payback. And I'll give you an example of that. We looked at the plant in basically 3 different components for these purposes. One was basically the prep systems, one were the hold systems, and one were the product contact systems. And what we did is, in this case, looked at fully disposable, and we said, what happens if we just change over our prep systems? And we took our CapEx model, came up with a number of, roughly $9 million for the CapEx differential, calculated a depreciation, look at the OpEx differential by eliminating the disposables and other components that you would get, and then we ended up with both a tipping point and a payback. And the tipping point was roughly around, call it 20 batches per year, where you might want to think about going from single use to start integrating stainless. The payback, on the other hand, was 300 batches. So if you think about if you're doing 20 batches a year, that's a long time. But if you're running multiple lines in parallel, and you think about running 40 batches a line, doing 100 batches a year, you could end up paying back on that in 3 years. So you end up with a completely different answer on the same analysis, depending on where you start and where you finish. And then just to kind of, wrap this up, looking at a few different parameters, but we looked at, what happens, from going from a fully disposable, what would cause you to want to do your solution prep in stainless? Well, really, if you're running over 20 batches a year, we thought, hey, that's when we want to start looking at stainless. But since we have a number of lines in parallel, it's probably something we would consider. When would you want to flip your hold systems from single use to stainless? Well, at that point in time, you've got to start running higher throughput. You're single. You're now out of the realm of a facility-wide support system into the realm of a single line, and you got to get better paybacks there. So your payback on the front end for your prep systems was higher. The payback on your hold systems was not as good, but there's still a lot of components there. And then I'll finish off kind of looking at the product contact. And product contact was very interesting because if you think about, as I mentioned before, if you think about the systems, there aren't as many disposable components in product contact as there in all the support, in the buffer prep, the buffer hold. And as a result of that, if you think of, you've taken all of the low-hanging fruit from your bill of materials, and all you've got left is the product contact. And the product contact is where your changeover, your cleaning validation, there are a lot of expensive systems there from a piping perspective, there are expensive components there from a changeover perspective, and there's a really high hurdle there then to jump to get yourself from a product contact going from single use to stainless. I think the two major drivers are super high throughput, a low product changeover where you're not losing a lot of time. And I'll leave it with that. Keep us moving on.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Bill Hartzell from Catalent, another expert in CMO adoption.
All right. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak here. And I think ultimately, I'll keep this one going relatively quickly as we go through so we can make sure that we get to your questions. But for one of the things that to focus on is being a service provider. One really big thing for us is to make sure that we offer the needs of what the market space is looking for. So from a Catalent perspective, as we looked at, really the biomanufacturing process and where we were in the stage, one of the main things that we really focused on was how did we align our business strategy and our manufacturing strategy. And ultimately, the decision to go from a single-use system or a fixed system really is your manufacturing strategy. And we've got to make sure that that is aligning to what we're trying to serve in the market space. So from our perspective, when we look at what the market space is in need of, right, and you really take a look at the dynamics, at the end of the day, in the biopharmaceutical space, small to mid-sized companies are absolutely dominating your discovery element in your phase 1, phase 2 portions of it. So if you look at from what the R&D from a biopharmaceutical companies, where they really start to come into play is where do we capture those in that phase 2 to phase 3 time frame, right? So looking at the market space, where and who we're serving becomes a big consideration for what type of equipment and at what scale we need to have, right? The industry as well also has funding challenges, right? So now you're talking, if you are talking to small to mid-sized companies, them getting to their next milestone, their ability to garner and grasp the next step in the next financial statement is very important. So speed is going to be an overlying a priority for these organizations as they move through. And ultimately proteins are becoming more complex. The discovery of a naked antibody isn't as relevant today as it was 10 years ago. So now where and how we're looking at those complexities, different ADCs that are going out there, and how do we make sure that our manufacturing capabilities are able to meet the needs of that market space. And that's really what becomes the foundation of how we make our decisions between single use and a fixed system, where and how we do that and make sure that we align. So just from a historical perspective, in 2011, right, we made this decision, right, and we looked at it from an expansion standpoint. So our history really started out manufacturing in cows, right? So where our cell expression technology, it was a transgenic material, and we started out that way. Hence why we're located in Madison, Wisconsin, right? So we had a lot of bioreactors available for us. And now as we progressed in that 2011 timeframe, we were at a point because we had transitioned into traditional stainless steel reactors, and we were really at a stage where we needed to expand out. And so at that period of time, we started to take that consideration. Do we continue down the path of a stainless steel or a fixed system, or do we go into a single-use manufacturing system? And at that time, we looked at those, areas and places, and now as we're heading into 2016, we're also looking at the potential for expansion, right? And so how do we look at it, from today's time? What do we need to do from our standpoint? So ultimately, our evolution of thinking really in that 2011 timeframe, we already had purchased the bioreactors. And I think this is where Catalent has a very unique story when it comes down to it, is that in 2011, when we had to make a decision to go from stainless steel or to a fixed system, or to a single-use system, we had already purchased in 2008 the single-use, or the stainless steel bioreactors. And we had already had them there, we had them in inventory, and we basically had to halt the project because of the downturn in the economy. But when that came back up in 2011, we had to make that decision, right? And at the end of the day, CapEx became neutral in this type of situation because a lot of it was already paid for. So at that period of time where our real moment of truth came, right, when we were looking at the market dynamics, looking at the business drivers, it was really when we sold those stainless steel vessels and really made that commitment to go to single use. And I think the biggest key here was we made that decision in June of 2012, and by June of 2013, we had a facility that was up and running, making GMP material. And we are already starting from a revenue standpoint, being able to generate revenue out of that facility. And that really can only take place from a single-use standpoint. And that's really one of the big drivers of where and how we were able to embrace really single-use as a technology of what we were able to do, but then what it gave to our customers, right? And it gave us the ability to be able to turn around batches faster. We were able to do things, to reduce risk and to simplify, our design so that we're able to move products through. And when we're dealing with small to mid-sized companies, they need to get to that milestone. And for us, single use, really gave us that potential to deliver speed to the market space. And that married up very well with our cell expression technology that was doing that already. And that was one of the main sells of the technology and the cell expression technology is its speed. And so now we were able to marry our manufacturing philosophy with our technology and with the needs of the market space. So now as we're, here in the 2000, as we're looking to expand from our technology standpoint, these are some of the things that we had to have from a points to consider standpoint that made that transition very well. Ultimately, as you go through this, supplier relations, again, that partnership that you have to have. It's not just buying a box, as Danny said, of getting a bioreactor shipped to you. It's that relationship that you have to build. Because ultimately what you're doing is outsourcing your validation, right? So you have to make sure that supplier relationship is very, very strong. Also training, and so Danny touched on this as well. Training is a very important part of what we're doing and how do we have it from a consideration because it is something new. So where we had, our hiccups and things in the early stages, where people are talking about, leak integrity of bags and those types of things, right? A lot of it had to do with how we were employing them, how we were implementing them. And that's where that partnership with your supplier, making sure that you're training your personnel on being able to deliver those things, why that stuff is so critical, where and how we actually transition, from a stainless steel system to a single-use system. So with that, I will try to wrap it up and get it over to Susan.
Bill, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think we understand that, as Bill mentioned, speed and training were a couple of key issues here. And I'm trainable. I was talking with some folks from BPSA today about training in single use. And the issues surrounding training are not going away, but they have the opportunity to be fixed. So as we go through, some of the questions that would be great to ask would be around training as well. Look forward to hearing some of those.
So we wanted to come back this year and talk about, so where did we end up? So last year, my colleague Tom Pembino and I talked about, so how do we decide? How do we pick between single use and stainless steel? And as an engineering company, we see a lot of different projects go forward. And we see projects from CMOs, we see projects from owner manufacturers, and we get the opportunity to kind of think about it from a broad spectrum point of view. And I would say that in the end, our conclusions across all of that space end up lining up, and I think we're starting as an industry to come to a place where we understand the value and where single use belongs, and we know how to leverage and use stainless steel when we need it. And so I think that that's really the message that you hear from everybody now. So as of last year, we talked about what were the bold assertions. So what do everybody assume about single use, whether it's proven or not? Because we do often have clients who go for single use because they want to. And it's not necessarily driven by a data analysis or a deep engineering study. And so what are those assumptions that are deep ingrained in people's minds that are driving them there? And these are some of the assumptions we talked about last year. That it's always more flexible, which is definitely a value when you're in a multi-product facility as we've already heard, is really valuable when you're in a clinical scale facility, when you're going to rotate products, when you don't know what you're going to make. Lower cost. The assumption that it's lower cost, I have to say, can be challenged, and I think we've talked about that plenty of times, and the difference between your definition of cost. So is it what you're paying today for your capital, or is what you're paying over the next 20 years for making 300 batches a year? And really it depends on where you sit. Facilitating open architecture, really we don't see a difference in the deliverable there, in the performance of the equipment, in delivering an opportunity to use open architecture, in the ability to get to closed processing. You'll have some pieces of single use you can get there with stainless steel and hard piping. It provides reliable supply. Well, hopefully we can get to reliable supply with whatever equipment we pick. So that's probably not a good driver for choosing. You better pick equipment that can get you reliable supply, or your business is not heading in the right direction. And then last, quicker implementation. I think hands down, you can't beat that, right? You can't put in a tank as fast as you can pick up a bag. You can take one of these bags over here and stick it in your facility, and you saw the drawing, the pictures that came out of the facility at Catalent, how fast you can do that. So what are we seeing overall, looking across bioprocessing space? So we stuck, because we're here at the bioprocessing theater, we stuck with the bioprocess space. I have to tell you, we are seeing single use getting used in other places. It does get used in API manufacturing. Of course, you get to using solvents, and the single use goes away because it goes away. So the solvents go right through it, and we don't really see a lot of fully implementable solutions there. But certainly there are raw material transportation, there are charging solutions, there are places where we will be and continue to expand the use, even in chemical synthesis API. But back to focusing on bioprocess, where we really see a predominant, a lot of use, media buffer prep, we talked about single use is really the majority that we start with, but you get to large scale, you start bringing buffer in for 4 trains of DSP like we talked about, and you really can't get a bag big enough to keep you running week to week. And so you start to need to rely on more fixed capacity, more stainless steel capabilities. Adherent cell, I love to remind people that all vaccines started in disposables 50 years ago. Roller bottles, cell cubes, shake flasks, tea flasks, all disposable equipment. So it's not as new technology as we sometimes think. The upstream fermentation, we're starting to get capability. We're still mostly in stainless steel there, but we're starting to get capability. Interestingly, a lot of fermentation is very large scale, because the molecules that are being made tend to be at larger scale deliverables to the market, and so that's why we kind of see a shift more towards the larger scale stainless steel. When you talk about cell culture, we're seeing a mix. Depends on what you need. Chromatography, filtration, starting to still see kind of a mix there. Maybe trending towards single use and filtration, but a pretty 50-50 mix in chromatography, I would say, primarily driven by the availability of the right packing material in the right situation. And then centrifugation, we've got a couple of solutions in centrifugation, but it's still a challenge in a lot of our space. And then last, bulk fill or aseptic fill. You've got the opportunity to use single use, and we do use single use because that's a place where it really provides value. You tend to be at lower volumes by the time you get there, and you tend to be in a suite that you may share and change over a lot. So that those are the same drivers that we just heard about. So in summary, our same summary from last year, which is you should make the decision based on your project, not based on some assumptions or something that you heard or some fancy new toy you saw at a show, but you should think about your project and your business and what it's trying to deliver. And listed here, I'm not going to go through them all, but we've talked about most of them already anyways, is a list of some of those ideas. And what should you be considering when you're making this decision? And in the end, it comes down to your project, your company, your culture, everything that is going to be right for your business. And your support staff, your engineering groups, whether internal or external, can help you think through those alternatives and certainly make the decision that brings you the best benefit. So, final slide, it's not either or. We're going to continue to use single use as an option in our toolbox. Hybrid designs are starting to be the most common thing, and as a matter of fact, I think we're at a place where we probably will never build again a fully stainless steel hard pipe facility for a bioprocess operation. I think there's always places, and finding those places where disposables bringing business value, you're going to find some. There will be fully single-use solutions, and there are reasons for fully single-use solutions. So I think that, if you think about it on a spectrum, we probably continue to provide a spectrum of solutions from hybrid to fully single-use. So that's my summary, and we can work in some questions.
Thank you so much for that, Sue. I think the idea or the visual of a spectrum trend toward hybrid systems at the end of stainless is quite a bold statement to make. I think that that opens up a lot of opportunity for questions. I don't think we have a shy audience here, and we've actually prepared a few questions for our panel. But what I'd like to try to do is go ahead, and if you've got some questions out there, if anyone doesn't, we'll feed the audience. But I see one hand. Can you speak very loud, and our panel will. That's a great question, and if I can summarize, it sounds like what's the single thing that's happened in the last 12 months that's really affected the single-use adoption, and how they've impacted stainless? Who'd like to go first?
But what we see in the single-use case is the expansion of capabilities. Things are getting bigger, things are getting broader in terms of the technologies and the tools that are available. Talk about sensing, automation, the ability to bring it all together into a full solution. I think that just continues to grow and continues to get a richer development environment. And will continue. I don't think some things are cyclical. I don't think it's really being a cycle where the pendulum's going to swing all the way back one way or the other. I think that we're steadily leading to a place where we're finding the right pieces for the right technology, and that's starting to come back. I asked a question about 18 months ago at a conference where they were talking product development, and they were talking about all the data they had so they could do single use, and they were going to studies, and they said, well, what about when you product kits? And you need to make, tens of thousands of grams of this material to meet the market needs. How do you get back into stainless? You need new data to get back into stainless. And I got a look from the panel that was just like, that's a foreign language. Because why would we go back? We're just going to build more of it. And I think that we're at a place where we're starting to understand that we need to balance and find a solution.
Yeah, I would just say that, a couple of things about running single use versus stainless. Stainless, you can do a lot of things from a layout perspective and an automation perspective that aren't attainable with a single use. In order to integrate into a hybrid solution, you've got to go back and take a look at what's going on with stainless and what's going on with single use and figure out how to integrate those together. Talk about the single use impact on the stainless. One scenario is really going to impact. But if single use is going to be a big piece of the market, how do we create stainless steel solutions that are integrated with our, as we said before, it's going to be rare when you see 100% stainless steel solution with the stainless steel system have to be integrated with single use. Up and down the production plan.
Just a couple of thoughts on the last year. Externally, we've seen BPI and so forth come forth with closer standards for R&D. We wanted this for a long time. We're finally moving in that direction. We have white papers and final papers that say that we have standard methodology for booking modality, which helps everybody in the single-use arena, whether the suppliers or the end users. The other piece internally for us is also around standardization. Initially looking at that huge spectrum of different tools that are available, our own internal experience is now starting to allow us to focus on what the best solutions might be, whether it be upstream or downstream or a particular type of application. So there's a industry learning, both externally and internally. We seem to have crystallized a bit more in the last year.
Another question. Okay, all right, very good, very good. This will be easy. Okay, there we go. After working with a supplier and qualifying their bags, for example, extractables, how is it feasible for a new supplier to compete? Should the ABEX of the world give up on trying to enter the market?
Well, I think this becomes a difficult challenge, right? And this is something, from a service provider's perspective, that we always want to make sure that we are at least talking to people and giving them multiple options. So in another place where we're at, in another facility, we do blow-fill seal technology, right? And it's one that is heavily based in the final fill container, and it's a place that we are very, very close. It's all commercialized product. And one of the things in the strategies that we do in the upfront is to look at ways of qualifying in the beginning, right? To give you that freedom and to give you that flexibility to make sure that you've got dual and redundant supply. And I think that becomes one of the challenges. And without that, that's where your supply chain management really has to come into play, making sure that you have the right inventory levels and you have the right books, to manage a single source in what we do. But ultimately, I think to that point, I don't think it's a give up. I think that we are now continuing to evaluate and continuing to move forward, right? And when you start looking at products from phase 1, phase 2, have a different look from a risk management standpoint, but you do when we start to scale up into phase 3 and commercial, that's where those types of evaluations really start to need to take place and making sure that you're not tied just to one source.
Another question? Before we go on, there's a second question up there. What key factors would drive you to switch from single-use to stainless steel? That's kind of a backward way of thinking about what we've talked about for the last 10 years. What would cause you to switch from single-use?
So I'll keep going on this one. So, from our standpoint, some of the considerations that you have to look at is really scale, right? That's going to be one big driver. And also, once you get to a point where the product is known, right? You're out of that drug development phase that you're going P3 into commercial, making an investment into the automation elements of it and to build out either dedicated lines, dedicated facilities, those things then start to make sense of where you start to consider going back from a stainless steel standpoint. But when we're talking about it, it's also not broad-based. As Susan brought up, John brought up, that a lot of the systems now aren't just going to be, there may be one element of it, right? You may go to a stainless steel bioreactor is where you're looking at it, media prep, maybe something different, or the reverse, right? Media being in, stainless steel versus a single-use site. So I think, from this perspective, it's not just the product itself. You also have to look at where in the process that you're going to implement, single-use versus a stainless steel.
Yeah, I'll come back to the points. One is definitely scale. At a certain point in time, you just can't push around the volumes that you need to in single-use portable systems. You've got to run fixed systems and you're pushing them all. So that would be one consideration. Everybody's going to have different preferences, so it's going to happen at different points. But if you push, there's a certain point in time you're going to drop your money to say, hey, I'm going to go with stainless. The other is throughput. And when you're in portable systems, you've got to move the buffers and the fluids around on the floor. And some point in time, when you're running at a fast enough pace, you're not going to have enough floor space, and you're going to need to go vertical or make some other change to get there. So, as I was saying before, it isn't necessarily a single point, but those are the factors that would drive you out of a single use consideration integrating more things.
Okay. Other questions from the floor? Well, I've got a quick one here on the list because our panel has already brought it up a couple of times. Is the high implementation issues, especially as it relates to hybrid and innovation associated with implementation and development of hybrid approaches. How will biopharma companies implement a hybrid approach going toward 50%, much less 100% single use? What is that innovation, that key that's missing right now? Is it automation? Is it something as simple as connectability?
I think that the hybrid solutions that we're getting are actually working. So we have that capability now. I think the things we do need to continue is things like steamable connectors. Those are relatively new technologies to get our experience with our users. Thinking about manifolds, the sensors and automation is certainly a piece of that. Being able to monitor the connections and make sure that the connections that you meant to make and that you have integrity with those connections. As we get into more and more high-risk products, where it's high value, we want to know it's good when we start. We don't want to find out later after we tested it out. So it's having that capability to establish quality parameters in front of the processing operation, and being able to know that you can make those connections, that you can measure those things that matter from a total quality point of view.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what she said, really. And so it's process control. It's knowing that you're producing a good quality product while you're producing and not having to wait. And so we're still waiting on the full range of sensor technology for what they call process analytical technology, so that you can monitor in a single-use system as well as you can in a steamable system. I think that's still coming along, but it's recognized, and the technology is beginning to catch up on the sensor side. We can make manifolds, we can connect that, we can store things, but to be able to monitor them in that single-use format is still a little slower.
If we have no other questions, then I think we can probably wrap up on the idea that in 12 months we'll probably be having more conversations about real-time monitoring, measuring, metrics, and sensing, so that these products, whether they be high value or not, are able to be produced in single use as efficiently as possible. So again, with this audience, it's wonderful to have a group this big. It does show that this topic is still hot. This panel is the spot to bring your questions to. So let's give a round of applause for their efforts. Thank you again. And we'll see you in a year.